Thanks, Georgie. Very cool and calm, and you mentioned the words authentic leadership. It's great to see once again a speaker get up here and share their own story, not only from a personal point of view, but a professional point of view, and mixing the both. Complete vulnerability and rawness, which I think really resonated with the crowd, and a brilliant story to share. Some key messages we saw there, obviously, and there's a theme throughout when we hear about mental health, is obviously talking to each other, trying to recognise the signs and symptoms of your friends, family, colleagues, those that are closest to you, and just ask the question, are you okay? As Georgie said, be a good listener and be supportive. So thanks again for that high-level talk on mental health, Georgie. Now what we'll do, that concludes in terms of the speakers for tonight, but we will have a panel session where we'll have 10 to 15 minutes of questions. If each of the speakers could please come up and sit up on stage, and we'll have a microphone. So if you please can put your hand up and direct a question. We don't have a microphone out in the audience, so stand up and yell your question out as loud as you can so that we can all hear. That'd be much appreciated. Has anyone got an opening question for a panel member? Don't be shy. We all done?
Georgie, just on the green through to red graph you put up there, and the points of comfort versus tripping over the red line. The pressures of work, life, family. You very rarely live in the green. You tend to be in that red and orange type colours. Seeking out sort of downtime. What are your sort of thoughts around trying to get a break from the pressures of all of the things we put on ourselves as individuals and families to try and get some retreat from that orange and red type?
Yeah, look, I in these situations I don't give advice other than reflect on my own experience. So I am a single person with a dog. I have no children. My life is very full. I have a very demanding job. I travel a lot. I've got a good social life. The things that I think you got to figure out what's really important. So my life is incredibly uncomplicated compared to families, for example. And I take my hat off to the men and women who actually hold down full-time jobs and have kids. I mean, I don't think I'd be capable, to be frank. I can hardly look after myself. So I think you've got to really carve out the things that are very, very precious to you and bring you that joy. And the things that do that for me are, I've now got a routine, and I think it is discipline. It's actually not motivation. Yes, I want to look great in a bikini again, but it's the discipline of knowing that I get up at 5 o'clock 3 mornings a week and I drive to my personal trainer and I sweat for an hour. And I do that at a time that I know I'm not going to be expected to be available on the end of the phone. I do that at a time when, I know that I can just focus entirely on me. It makes me exhausted, but that's the discipline that you have. Those are the discipline choices that you need to make. So, I mean, look, at the end of the day, there's no straightforward answer. Everyone has got their own formula, but that's what works for me, is doing the physical exercise and being very clear about, the amount of alcohol I drink, and the amount of time that I spend actually physically at work. Just because I work a 8-9 hour day physically in the office doesn't mean I don't go home and do the night shift. But I think it's also about role modelling. I always leave work at 6 o'clock unless there is something that I need to stay for, because I think it's really important that my staff see that I go home. Now, they don't need to know that I go home and feed my dog, go for a walk, feed myself, and then perhaps go through my intro or do my emails. But it's actually about carving out the things that are important. Sorry, that was a really long-winded answer. I don't know if that answers your question, but that was my best shot.
I'll make a comment too. Mental health amongst healthcare professionals is exceptionally high, and particularly amongst doctors. And part of it's the environment that we work in, and I've tried to highlight that. I'm giving a talk later in the year at an emergency medicine conference about longevity in emergency medicine, because it's a very difficult environment to work in. And one of the things I'm going to talk to them about is the concept of the third place. You have home and you have work, but you need a third place. And everyone should have a third place, and it should be away from work and away from home. And, you know, it might be Sunday afternoon at the MCG watching your footy team lose, like mine does usually. Or, you know, it might be the local cafe where you might go there with a book or your laptop, or you might catch up with a few mates, play pool at the pub or something. So I think that's really important, that that you have that third place. One of the third places I have is the Harp Hotel on a Monday night, playing trivia with a few friends that I've met from parents from school. So it's just a great sort of circuit breaker. I did have one other thing, can't recall what it was.
I'll just quickly add to that as well, because I think for elite sports people in this space, I think the world has really changed recently. We've seen a lot of athletes coming forward now talking about the struggles that they're having with mental health. And even as recently as today, Shani Layton, who's the captain of the Australian Netball Diamonds, has withdrawn from the upcoming series through exhaustion. And, you know, putting a lot of kind of support networks around her is important. But I think having these discussions, the work that Beyond Blue does, seeing people who we look up to, and we do look up to elite sports people quite a bit, I think having that happen more often and be more visible, it makes it more okay, and it hopefully will break down some of that stigma around, you know, putting your hand up to say, you know, I need some help, and that's okay. And so I think I think the world seems to be changing, Georgie. I don't know, you're nodding in agreement, which is good. I think it's more acceptable now to put your hand up, and I think obviously that is great, and that's where we need to continue heading.
I remembered what it was I was going to say. We did a staff survey a couple of years ago, and there was a question in it that a lot of people thought was a bit odd, and the question was, do you have a best friend at work? And people didn't like the concept of best friend, but I think it's a really good question. Do you have a friend or friends at work? And I think it's really important to have friends at work, and that you can have a coffee with and talk about stuff that's not work related. You know, if you work in an environment where you're in isolation and you don't really have a relationship, a non-work relationship at work with those people, I think it isn't good for your mental health. I think it's really important to connect with people that you work with. I mean, people wonder about some of the conversations I have at work with people. You know, I've got SSAs, orderlies, who I talk to them about the football or the soccer, or you know, what they did over the weekend. And you know, if you can connect with different people with different things, or bands, you know, nursing staff that, you know, bands that we go and see and that sort of thing. I think it's really important to have friends and interests that you can connect with people that's completely unwork related. Although some people think I talk too much and probably don't spend enough time working.
And switch off the social media.
When you retired from obviously a high level sport, what did you do to fill up your time? You were used to this discipline and training, and your food and everything was focused around that. So you woke up, you're not playing anymore. What do you do with your day? How did you manage that?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and there's been a few programs on elite athletes retiring and the way they cope with that. And I guess it's the same in, retiring from anything that you do. There's that transition period, that's for sure. And for me, as I said, I moved out of home when I was 16, and I went and trained at the VIS, and we trained every day, sometimes twice a day. And I did that for 20 years, or more than 20 years. And so then to come out of that environment, it was challenging. And I kind of thought I was a bit of a, fly by the seat of my pants kind of gal. But when I got out of that real structured environment, I realised that I liked that, and I craved that. I liked being told where to be at what time and what we were going to do. It's kind of what I knew. So coming out of that was hard. I did some coaching with the netball team, with the Melbourne Vixens who I played with, to make sure that I continued that connection with really like-minded people. And I'm still doing that now, 4 years later. And that for me was crucially important, I think, to keep that connection and have that common interest. And I doing broadcast, I had a little baby, I had another baby, so I had lots to fill my time. But it's an interesting thing transitioning out of, as I said, I went from playing in front of 12,000 people quite regularly to, pushing the pram down the street. It's kind of a jolt in some ways to come out of that environment. But I made sure I was kept connected with the people. And again, I spoke about relationships earlier in my speech, and that was a real key for me right throughout my career, and it continues to be.
Do you have a perspective on legalising drugs in the community?
I used to be responsible for drug policy in the Commonwealth. And my view, it's a personal view, what we're doing now is not working. So I think that we should try something different.
Specifically, the legalised injecting rooms. I mean, certainly the evidence from Sydney has been very positive, and really good positive and good outcomes from that. So, from that point of view, I think Victoria probably will end up going down that path. I don't know if I've got the answer for. I mean, there are so many different drugs that are now out there on the market. Only yesterday there was a guy brought in, sort of semi-conscious from using one of these synthetic marijuana products, brought into the emergency department. Look, I think there needs to be tighter controls on what's available out there. The problem now with, the internet and the dark web, and you can order stuff online from, or you can just go to these shops that they sell these things that they market as. They're not marketed as a drug. They're marketed as something else, and I don't have the answer to that. If we legalise marijuana, will that change that whole market? I don't know the answer. We at St Vincent, we've got an astonishingly good addiction medicine unit at St Vincent's. It's been running now for more than 50 years, and there are people there that are probably far more qualified to comment on that answer. And I guess the last comment I'll make is that the biggest drug problem we have is legal.
Georgie, you're involved with plain packaging of cigarettes. Since alcohol is such a huge problem, have they thought about plain packaging for alcohol?
Yeah, that was actually a really live policy debate when I was working in Canberra, but it wasn't politically palatable. There's a significant influence that the alcohol industry has on political parties. Similar to what used to happen in the bad old days with tobacco industry, when before political parties banned, only would accept certain donations. So yeah, I mean, there's very strong evidence to show that would be a policy direction that is worth trying. You look at what we did with tobacco. I mean, the two major levers of reduction, and I take your point. The biggest drug problem we have in this country is with booze. But what worked in tobacco is price. You impact the price, and you impact whether or not it's sexy. through sort of social marketing and indeed things like plain packaging. So those are the kinds of levers that I think could be translated into different types of other of drugs.
George, just on that same theme, the one that we haven't picked up on is gambling.
Yeah.
So outside of the drug issue of intake, I think there are 15 gambling organisations that people are now being pressed with through mobile phones, easy access, 24/7, and where that takes individuals is
absolutely.
Scary.
And I think it's one of those social issues that we're only really starting to understand the impact of and talk about. I mean, we've started to see social marketing campaigns now on TV about problem gambling. We've started to see a proliferation of helplines, which is long overdue. So I think it's one of those issues that will catch up, but it's a massive problem.
The addiction that governments have to the taxes, so too with alcohol and so too with gambling. And it seems to be this cycle of no one's prepared to take the reins.
Yeah. This is getting very political. This is why I left Canberra. And can I just say, these are all my personal views, not Beyond Blue.
Just up the back first, had the hand up for quite some time.
I'm just wondering, when that patient, like whether they've been affected by alcohol or ice, as was drawing a commercial, is then gone through the emergency department and essentially leave, what can the hospital do in terms of directing them towards some sort of counselling service, or what's available to them? Or are they essentially put back out on the street in society to deal with themselves?
Very good question. So we, as I said, we have a very good addiction medicine service, and we provide the opportunity for brief interventions, particularly for young people at weekends. So we have a staff member who works from 6:30 to midday every Saturday and Sunday in order to capture particularly the young people that have come in alcohol or other drug affected, in order to provide them with a brief intervention, an opportunity to be provided with some information to get them some help. The chronic ice users, for instance, and the chronic alcoholics are much more difficult to manage. The stimulant affected people, so like ice, often have no recollection of what happened last night. There was an incident just in the last week of a woman who hit someone in a car outside St Paul's Cathedral. That person in the pedestrian is in intensive care at the Alfred, but they brought the driver of the car to us for a mental health assessment. She had no recollection of what happened the night before, and she will presumably end up in jail as a consequence of this, but has no recollection of what happened. And it's really hard to have that conversation and try and provide them with some assistance when they don't actually recognise that they have a problem or have any memory of what happened. A lot of people also have a coexistent mental health problem, and we obviously provide them with mental health help as well. So often they're not just having a medical and nursing assessment, they're having a mental health assessment, and when it's appropriate to assess them, and also a drug and alcohol assessment.
My question is for Gunther. Thank you for sharing your story. I'm just curious, in your experience with death and your research on the subject, have you found good ways to approach it with children before they actually lose someone really close to them, children and young adults?
Well, thank you for your question. With children, it's quite different than with adults. They've got a different set of resources. Those resources within themselves are very undeveloped. I felt that at the time when Ed was diagnosed with MND, that I would work really hard to see what I can do to make sure that by the time that Ed did die, that they would be in a better place than if I hadn't have approached it from that perspective. The sad thing was that we had, especially with my son, we had long conversations. Sometimes they would, and at that stage, gosh, he was only 7 or 8. they might last for 2 hours, the conversations. And he's now 30, can't remember them. And just because it was just too painful. And the same with my daughter, she dealt with it in a different way, by either blocking it out or just hurting herself, not in the way that you might imagine, but just by whether she's playing on monkey bars or doing something around the house, and she would just hurt herself. And that was her way of having some sort of reality to where she found herself. So after their father died, they, in actual fact, even though we spoke about it and we dealt with it as best all of us could, they had counselling through schools. It was only when they reached their late teens and early 20s that they went into formal counselling and were able to start to unravel what they really went through at that time. So, yes, there's no simple way to answer that question, but yes, you can prepare them as much as you like, but yes, their resources are limited of how they can manage to deal with it.
Thank you for all your questions, and thank you for everyone attending. We're almost finished, and thank you if we can all put our hands together for our brilliant speakers. We have filmed tonight's session, and also Liam down the front here will be out the front. If anyone's got anything to say positively in terms of what they heard tonight, anything about the game changes, we'll be using that in some marketing and social media. If you've got a testimonial to put forward, then that'd be much appreciated in terms of what you've got out of tonight. Before I leave, I'd just like to hand over to Paul Lefay just to close the meeting.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Mike. And again, thank you to the panel. This could be slightly awkward, particularly for you, Andrew. However, so on behalf of us here at the club tonight, we'd certainly like to thank all of our panel. You can guess what's in the box, Andrew, but we'll even give you one as well, as long as it's in moderation. We did promise to get you out the door by 9, and we're going to keep to that promise. Just in closing, again, thank you to the panel and a great job, Mike, so thank you once again. I'm delighted to announce tonight that following our recent association with Beyond Blue, we are very pleased to advise that Beyond Blue will become the Odds of Arians Football Club player wellbeing partner. So what does that mean? That means that we now have an opportunity to access the invaluable information that Beyond Blue can share to the community. We can actually channel that through directly to our football club website in our player wellbeing section. So all of the materials, the information, frequently asked questions, all those contact details we think are important. The key message tonight about the mental health is, the stigma and the discrimination piece, and we are going to play our part in pushing that message through. So, Georgie, on behalf of the club, we really do look forward to a long and mutually rewarding association with you, and we certainly aim to support the community and those who benefit from the services that Beyond Blue provides. So thank you so much for partnering with us. We really do appreciate it. Later this month, we at the Football Club will be launching a support network, and it's aimed at essentially providing a core group, I'll loosely call them coaches, mentors, who could be available to young people who might benefit from accessing the wisdom and advice from some senior folks around employment, education, it might be around financial guidance, and of course health and wellbeing. It's not expected to be an onerous commitment. We're really just trying to build, if you like, a cohort of interested members of our community who can work with us to build that support network for young people, and that'll be launched later this month. We'll be broadcasting it shortly, and it'll be a simple matter of registering your interest on a dedicated email address, which just happens to be oxfcnetwork@gmail.com, but you'll learn more a little bit about that later this month. Thank you once again for attending tonight. We have our collectors out in the foyer, so if you feel the urge again, being inspired by our speakers tonight, if you feel the urge that you want to throw some more coin in, we'll have our tin rattlers out the front. Mike just mentioned that tonight's being videoed. I'd just like to take the chance to thank Ian Boniccia for his time behind the camera tonight. Thank you again, Ian. He does a fantastic job for us all the time. So those sessions will be posted on our club website, so if you'd like to have a recap or use it as an opportunity to share with your friends or your family, that'll be available on our website. Our next Game Changers session will be in March 2018, and as Georgie mentioned, it'll be upon us before we know it. So we look forward to seeing you again and hopefully bring some more friends and family with you. Thank you and good night.
All our accomplished speakers from Game Changers 2, so we'd like to thank you for giving up your time and sharing your wisdom. If we could just ask what your thoughts are in terms of the night and how it unfolded and what sort of value it adds to the community, and I guess why you decided to take part.
From my perspective, it was all about continuing the conversation that I started with Paul about us forming a partnership, but also platforms like this, community-based events like this, really give us the opportunity to get quite complex messages across in a setting that's actually quite intimate, and sort of have more difficult conversations. So I think that was part of it for me. But I think the thing that I've really felt about tonight was all these wonderful people who I've never met before. We all have so much in common, despite having very different professional backgrounds and life experiences. And the common thread is that we've all got to look after our well-being. And that's at the heart of what I do in my professional life and what I try to do in my personal life.
Andrew?
For me, I recognise it was a great opportunity to give people an insight into what it's like at the other end when that ambulance arrives and when that young person arrives drunk or drug affected, and the impact that has on them, the impact that has on their friends, their family, and the staff that have to manage them. And I once heard someone wise say, what are your greatest fears? And they said, my greatest fears revolve around my children. And I feel that myself. I've got a 15-year-old, an 18-year-old and a 21-year-old. And I fear that they'll end up in an emergency department, either directly as a result of drugs and alcohol or as an innocent victim of the results of drugs and alcohol. And if that message can get out, particularly to the young people that were in the audience today, I think that's really important.
Fantastic. You certainly did that. And Gunther?
Well, I like the word that Georgie used, conversation. I think we need more conversations about death and dying, about grief and loss. And the more conversations we have in these type of forums, where hopefully people will go home and then talk about what they've heard tonight, then hopefully we'll start to have more insight in how to best go about addressing all of that, and then having those conversations on a greater platform that we all need to have to make it a more a conversation that we feel it's more natural, and that is something that is just part of life and that is going to happen at some stage.
Brilliant, well said. And for our fourth and final speaker, and Sherelle?
Yeah, well, when I was first asked to come along tonight, what I loved about it was the basis of it is around personal development and growth in the different challenges we come across in life. And I feel like I have lived a lot of my life in that when I was playing elite netball. And I just love how all that ties together. I love working with young people, and so the chance to do that again was fantastic. And I absolutely loved hearing the different stories today, kind of coming from very, very different angles. But as we've mentioned, some really common themes in there about how to approach things.
Thanks very much, and thanks for sharing your story. Thanks for attending tonight for Game Changers number 2. If you were to share your story in terms of what you got out of the night, to encourage others to come along to the next Game Changers, what would it be?
Oh, look, I think that the great speakers that you put up tonight, and some really, really good messages. As I said to you earlier, I was very keen for my son to come along tonight, and the messages about drug and alcohol, very strong. Some great information from Sherelle McMahon about discipline versus motivation. It's one of those things that your motivation can wane at times, but to have the discipline to pull through. And another thing that she said, which I thought was really good, was to invest in relationships that are positive and to stay away from the ones that bring you down. And I think that one does a big circle through all the speakers tonight, because the impact of having good friends around, and Andrew spoke about having friends at work, something we know about.
Yes, correct.
And to have those good relationships in place can short circuit a lot of the problems in life. And I think that was a really good message that went across all. But I would very strongly recommend that my son and some of his friends come along, because there's really good learnings there in terms of how to go about your life.
Fantastic.
So great. I really appreciate it, Mark.
Glad you enjoyed it, Mark. Thanks for coming.